Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading overseas for a three-leg trip. He's making stops in Paris and Dublin to talk trade before gathering with G7 leaders in the French Alps. Your host of CBC's Power and Politics, David Cochrane, is traveling with the Prime Minister. He joins me now from the tarmac of the Ottawa airport. So, David, the Prime Minister is expected to meet with leaders of France and Ireland this weekend. What are the expectations out of those talks?
Well, look, JP, whenever the Prime Minister goes on one of these trips to other countries around the world, he's obviously looking to expand trade opportunities, deepen partnerships, and strengthen alliances. So it's not going to surprise you when I say that that is going to be a focus of at least the first couple of days of this trip when he goes to France and when he goes to Ireland. France, you'll recall, JP, was the very first foreign trip that Mark Carney took when he became Prime Minister. And this one, this meeting with Emmanuel Macron, is really a chance for the past chair of the G7 and the current chair of the G7 to meet one-on-one and sort of strategize going into the larger meeting that obviously President Macron is going to be hosting. So a conversation about what they hope to accomplish at the G7 summit over a couple of days, but also country-to-country conversations on issues like trade, defense, critical minerals, and of course artificial intelligence. And then it's off to Ireland, flying into Dublin on Saturday. And JP, this is kind of a blend of a personal and a professional trip. Both Canada and Ireland deeply want to increase trade between the two countries. You'll remember their Taoiseach, their Prime Minister, Michael Martin, was supposed to lead a major trade mission to Canada in April, but that was cancelled because of protests in Ireland by farmers and transportation workers who were upset with the shock in energy prices caused by the war in Iran. So less of an urgent trade focus with this. There's going to be a meeting between the two leaders. Mark Carney is going to give a high-profile keynote speech while he's there. And then the Irish government is throwing a gala to honor him on his visit, which is something they haven't done since President Joe Biden visited Ireland during his presidency. And the second day in Ireland, this is where the personal connection comes into it for the Prime Minister, JP. The Carney family hails from County Mayo in Ireland. And in 1925, his grandparents emigrated to Canada, arriving in Halifax with 5 Irish pounds in their pockets. And here you are, a century and 1 year later, that the grandson is returning to Ireland on a formal visit as the Prime Minister of a G7 country.
That's a nice touch. And then Prime Minister, of course, heading to Evian, France for the G7 summit next week. President Donald Trump expected to attend. What will you be watching for there?
Well, do they have a meeting, the President and the Prime Minister? We're all curious on that, and we know that everybody wants to meet with Donald Trump at these things. In terms of what Canada's looking for, 3 kind of priority issues on the big agenda. Critical minerals, which is something that Mark Carney made a priority of his tenure as chair of the G7. They want to work on supply chains, stability of supply, and relationships between the various countries. Global macroeconomic imbalances is a priority for Canada here. Essentially, the distortion of the market caused by countries like China that sell a whole lot of goods but buy very few goods. The G7 wants to find a way to calibrate a response to that. And they also want some direction on the future of international development. With the U.S. making these deep cuts to U.S. aid, the knock-on effect of that throughout the developing world, most of the historic donor countries are pulling back. And when you look at how things like the energy shock caused by what's happening in Iran is affecting those economies, it's a 1-2 punch of the aid withdrawal and now the economic hardship. But overarching it all, JP, is Donald Trump, right? The main character of global politics and North American politics, because normally at summits like this, the G7 gets together and tries to chart out a collective response to solve some of these problems. The problem they have is that the biggest of the 7 is the source of so many of these problems. There's a trade and tariff issue in Canada. The energy shock coming from the Strait of Hormuz has driven up the daily price of energy in Europe by about $500 million a day. And then you have countries like Japan, South Korea, and India, which are invited to this summit as G7 aligned countries. They get like 90% of their oil from the Middle East. So some of those countries are looking at rationing because of what's happening there. So while they try to find ways to move ahead on collective action, so many of their common challenges stem from the actions of the President of the United States.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much. CBC's David Cochrane. Be safe, have fun. We'll be checking in with you all next week too, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
As you just heard there, the Prime Minister has stops in Paris and Dublin to talk trade before he heads to the G7 meeting. David spoke to Ireland's ambassador to Canada, John Concannon, yesterday.
Ambassador, good to see you again, sir. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is the first official trip for a Canadian Prime Minister to Ireland in nearly a decade. How significant is Mark Carney's visit at this particular point in time?
It's hugely significant. The time it's coming is just on the cusp of Ireland's presidency of the European Union, which we take on the 1st of July for the following 6 months. So the first context here is that looking at the key diversification agenda of Prime Minister Carney coming to Ireland on the eve of our presidency, having just come to the EPC in Armenia just a short number of weeks ago, is very consequential because Ireland is a gateway to Europe for so many Canadian companies. So looking at this visit in the context of coming to visit not just Ireland, but Ireland as we take the presidency of the European Union is very significant. The second dimension that is particularly noteworthy is the scale of our bilateral relationship. Now, we do $14 billion of trade with each other. We can see a lot of upside potential. There's about 100 large-scale Canadian companies, OpenText, Shopify, Geotab, Bank of Montreal and so on, who all have their European headquarters in Dublin, and we see a very strong pipeline of investment into Ireland. And conversely, Ireland is now Canada's 10th biggest investor. So we, Irish firms, support 32,000 jobs from coast to coast to coast across Canada, and we have a significant pipeline of new investment coming into Canada. So that the leaders will talk about that. And then the third thing that this visit makes it very special is the whole story of the people-to-people links. Right. And Ireland and Canada have had hugely deep relations for so long. Irish people have been coming to Canada for centuries, including your own family who came from Waterford a number of hundreds of years ago. But and so you're looking at this sense of the Prime Minister's coming to Ireland. Right. And just to think that 100 years ago, his grandparents left in 1925 to come to Canada to look for a better life, to start for their family. And little did they know when they arrived here. And we have the records from the port of Halifax. You can see the Robert Carney arrived July 1925. And there's a little note on the file where he says the possessions were £5. So the Carneys came here, and little did they know that 100 years later, their grandson would return as the Prime Minister of Canada, the leader of a G7 country. So that's magical in that context.
There's something about Irish expats and North American politics, because Joe Biden, of course, Irish descent and became the President of the United States. So I don't know if that's a prerequisite or not. But just on the EU presidency, Canada is looking to obviously deepen its transatlantic economic ties, defense ties, cooperation on a lot of things, the middle power agenda that the Prime Minister outlined in Davos. How does Ireland's ascension to that role help on that particular agenda in terms of the Canada-Europe relationship through Ireland?
Well, it's hugely significant, because if you think about Canada and Ireland in the context of the European Union, well, first of all, we're the closest country to Canada in the European Union. We have 46,000 seats a week travelling between us from Newfoundland, from Halifax, from Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, so very great connectivity. We're an English-speaking country, we're a common law country, we're a very stable political environment. So when the government and businesses look to engage with Ireland as a platform into the European Union, it's really a longer-term agenda to look at, yes, investing in Ireland, but accessing the European Union. So it's really, the visit will include conversations about our presidency and how Canada will be involved. And I think the Taoiseach, when he was here last September, they had a conversation about how we'd like our presidency of the European Union to be very pro-Canada, to be involved, and where appropriate, to have officials or ministers involved in different meetings, and I know they'll discuss that. But it's a very important time for the European Union as we look to set the new budget and all of the agendas there in terms of energy, security, and in particular, there's particular dimensions on the artificial intelligence. And of course, Canada just launched its own policy last week. And on these are matters they will discuss. And when you see the sectors that we're quite successful in and what our economy is based on, for example, pharmaceuticals, Ireland is the third biggest exporter of pharmaceuticals in the world now. Medical devices, we have 75% share of the world's stents, for example, a €15 billion semiconductor industry. So tech, fintech, pharmaceuticals, life sciences is the area we're focused on. Right. And we see huge synergies with Canada.
Well, I know the Taoiseach was here in September. He was here in the studio. He was supposed to be here in April for a larger trade mission, but the fuel protests and farm protests at home, it was not a wise political move to leave. So some of this, building on that $14 billion trade agenda, do we expect a trade deal to come out of this? Do we expect formal agreements between Canada and Ireland to come out of this visit? Because it felt like the visit in April was maybe to set the stage for something this month.
Yeah, the visit in April was very ambitious. It was the Taoiseach, 5 ministers, and that visit has been postponed as against cancelled, and we certainly intend to have it happen again. So this visit in from a trade context is coming in overall, really in through the prism of CETA. So Ireland had provisionally ratified CETA along with all the other member states of the European Union, and since then our trade has nearly doubled. So it's been a huge success already. But just as recently as yesterday, David, the Senate in Ireland has concluded the democratic process of ratifying the arbitration bill, which now clears the path for the signing of CETA. So now the legislation goes to the President, and it has one last stage to go in terms of the President's, how the President will either call the Council of State or sign it into law. But from a political perspective, the process is concluded. So it's at a really good time that the Prime Minister is coming to meet the Taoiseach. So we see considerable upside within this report from the Conference Board of Canada. Yes, it's 14 billion, but we also identified 3 billion of further trade between both countries. So I think it's very, very positive.
Okay, so just on this, because I know Prime Minister Carney is going to meet with Taoiseach Martin, but I believe he's also going to meet with the President of Ireland. Could we see finalization of CETA during this trip, or is this something that has to wait longer than this weekend in June?
Well, what's happened essentially is that in order to ratify CETA, the government have to pass new legislation called the Arbitration Act, which was going to deal with exactly how any misunderstandings or conflicts would be dealt with. That went through our Parliament, to our Senate.
But could the President sign it this weekend, is what I'm wondering?
I think that the process around which that normally happens is the President takes advice and may have the Council of State. So, I mean, that is a matter for the President. But I don't think, I think we'd still, even for CETA, even if it was that case, the actual legal frameworks for CETA would still have to be drawn up. So I think it's unlikely to see the actual CETA signed this week. But what will certainly be clear is that the government have delivered the enabling legislation, so which is very, very significant, and we're very, very happy about that.
Well, it's interesting because CETA, while provisionally in force, is held up in a lot of different parliaments across Europe. But this sounds like it is going to be finalised and enforced and put in place sometime in 2026, by the end of this year in Ireland, most likely.
Well, I think the Taoiseach was very clear to the Prime Minister that it's a key priority of the government. I think the fact that they've delivered the arbitration bill this week is significant, and now the next step is to move that fully into legislation. So it's on track, but you know the processes we have to let the process finish out in terms of the President's decision making, and also whether or not there's engagement of the Council of State or others. But from a political perspective, the government now have delivered the key thing that they had to do, which was the enabling legislation. So the
$14 billion two-way trade, you've identified another $3 billion. I mean, is that sort of the ceiling of where you see this potentially going? How large do you think, should this relationship truly deepen to its full potential, it can get to? Because I know the Canadian officials in the run-up to this were talking about agri-food, digital innovation, AI, pharma, as you mentioned, and maybe some conversation on climate policy, because everyone's being forced to sort of adapt their plans on that. What do you see as the maximum potential of this economic relationship as everyone looks to diversify these days?
Indeed, it's a great question, and absolutely not that the $3 billion is not a ceiling. But what we wanted to do with this particular study was to try and quantify, look, what's the scale of our relationship? So then we were able to say, okay, there's $14 billion, and we're the 10th biggest investor in Canada. That's some things that people weren't as familiar with. And then we said, well, okay, quantifiably, how can we grow that? And so we were able to identify $3 billion, but that's not a ceiling. And I think when you look at it in the context of the industries you talk about, artificial intelligence, digital, pharmaceuticals, life sciences, they are scalable industries that Ireland is already a world leader in. Take, for example, the semiconductors market. It's a $3 billion industry here in Canada. It's a $15 billion industry in Ireland. So we think we can collaborate significantly on that. In terms of artificial intelligence, Ireland has the highest number of graduates in artificial intelligence per capita of any country in Europe. We're home to the top 20 global tech companies already, with very significant operations in Ireland, including OpenText, Geotab, Shopify, and many other Canadian companies. So when you think of Ireland as a base for Europe, and in some cases Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa and beyond, we think there's a lot of opportunity, but also it's two-way. I mean, so we have huge Irish companies like Curry Foods recently concluded a $1 billion acquisition just down at Niagara. We have just around the course Smurfit, CRH, and then a large number of small and medium enterprises which are now coming into the Canadian market and see huge opportunity here. So the sense in Ireland is Canada is investable. It's a big opportunity, and there's a lot of optimism about Canada.
John Concannon, Ireland's ambassador to Canada. I'm going on this trip, my first time to the motherland, so I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for coming in today. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, David.